as you know, the government has, with great cloth cap, what about the workers' fanfare, announced an inquiry into banking in New Zealand and supposedly the profits of banks and whether or not, somehow they're ripping us all off and people with money are evil. It is such a classic pre-election move, it's almost boringly predictable. And the poor old banking industry, which makes, some figures I've read suggest that, the expected profit for a bank, and there's lots of money involved, that's why the numbers are big. 1% a year, and that's enough to keep a bank happy. New Zealand banks might be making 1.5% a year. It's clearly good business banking because Michael Woods had shares in one of the parent banks of the big trading banks in New Zealand that he never disclosed. But the poor old banking industry now faces an inquiry that won't be finished, I think, till, after the election? And it's all about how much money they make. Will they comply, and what do they make, the banks, of this government's pre-election announcement of an inquiry? We're joined now by Roger Beaumont from the Bankers Association, which is kind of an umbrella lobbying advocacy groups for all the banks collectively. And I always like explaining what some association or group is, because so often journalists don't bother and you have no idea who the pointy head is that's flapping their gums at you. Roger, how are you, mate?
I'm really well, Sean. Thanks. Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So, look, I'm sorry. Here's the narrative as I think the government wants to paint it. You evil corporate capitalist, vote Labour, workers of the world unite. That's really what this inquiry is all about, isn't it?
Well, look, there's clearly been a lot of speculation and media coverage about the level of profits in the banks, and I think that's been causing a degree of consternation for some people. The bottom line is, yes, our banks are really profitable, and that's a good thing, because when I did economics at school, the definition of a successful business was a profitable business, and it was something to be encouraged. And so, having strong, profitable banks is really good for the economy, because the flip side of having strong and profitable banks is what we've seen in a couple of banks in America just this year that have actually failed, and one major bank in Europe that came very close to
it's
failing.
People jumping out of windows as they read the ticker tape is what bank failure is, isn't it? It's mortgagee sales and dust bowls.
Well, it's basically potentially the evaporation of a lot of your money, and I don't think anybody wants that. So if the cost of avoiding that is having strong, robust, profitable banks, I don't see the downside. And I think it's also really important to contextualize the bank profits, because yes, they are big numbers, but these are massively big businesses. So you can contextualize those profits by looking at what's called return on equity, which is a way of sort of measuring the performance of a business to the scale of the business. And when you do that measure, our major banks kind of sit middle of the pack in New Zealand. So it's not extreme. It's certainly not excessive. And I think the other point I'd make is you've got to think about the massive economic contributions that banks make to the New Zealand economy, not just in terms of, $530 billion worth of lending to New Zealanders for their homes or businesses, but actually the investment they make in terms of employing 25,000 people, paying an extraordinary amount of tax, and just investing by operating their businesses.
Yeah, all right. So, success shouldn't be penalised, and it shouldn't be regarded in any society as failure or as something to be suspicious of. 4 months out from an election, a centre-left government says we're going to look into banking. I'll tell you the context that's been painted around this by a lot of, and I would say centre-left advocates on social media, Roger, has been, look at what they found in Australia. And an inquiry into banking, I think it might have been a Royal Commission actually into banking in Australia, did uncover highly questionable, in some cases illegal practice. And I think there is an attempt being made to equate this inquiry with that Australian inquiry.
Well, look, there was some absolutely galling stuff that came out of the Australian Royal Commission. Absolutely, it was awful, and the government has, to be fair, made it really clear that this particular inquiry is not about culture and conduct. They've been quite explicit on that. Remember that in New Zealand, off the back of the Australian Royal Commission, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a regulator-led inquiry which looked into the culture and conduct of banks in New Zealand, and in simple terms found nothing untoward. There was some fine-tuning that was put in place in terms of regulation, but there was no systemic concern or issues that were uncovered. So this inquiry is primarily, according to the terms of reference, about competition in the market for retail banking or personal banking.
Yeah. Is it necessary?
Well, look, in a word, I don't think so, or no, because we have a very competitive market in New Zealand. There are 16 retail banks. So if you wanted to change banks today, you have 15 alternative brands that you could go with. And there's no restrictions on changing banks. There's a perception that it's really hard. It's actually a lot easier in reality. Basically, you can go to your new bank and they'll do all the behind the scenes work to make that happen. You don't even need to have the awkward breakup conversation with the bank that you're leaving in order to do that. It'll all happen seamlessly behind the scenes. And so, I think that's for the size of our population, to have 16 brands to choose from to do your banking, I think that's a pretty successful and competitive range of options.
Were you approached before this inquiry was announced and given the chance to put that view? Because as you describe it, I'm sorry, it's a waste of taxpayers' bloody money.
Well, as I think some media have speculated, it's actually the winners out of this are going to be the legal firms and consulting firms who are going to earn millions of dollars in fees for helping the banks to get through this inquiry, because it's a massive undertaking. I think one of the grocery companies is on the record from the grocery inquiry of saying that they spent $20 million on participating in that inquiry. If you multiply that by 16 banks, that's a lot of cash that could be spent on far more productive things. But look, this
by giving your customers better return on their on their investments, or keeping your interest rates lower for your mortgage holders. So really, this comes off your profitability.
Well, look, this is a government-led inquiry, and the industry will participate and be constructive in the way that we do participate, because actually we've got nothing to hide. We're a highly regulated industry, and so we're used to being very transparent and very open about what we do and how we do it, and we're going to continue to do that with the Commerce Commission.
Yeah, it must be frustrating though when you just want to get on with business. And do your business. Well, because there's no way and Roger, I know that as a lobbyist and representing a group of largely conservative businesses in New Zealand, you have to be careful what you say. But this just looks like politics, like practicing the politics of envy.
Yeah, well, look, it is particularly interesting timing, but that's just the way it's played out. What I would say in terms of, prioritisation of doing stuff for customers is, there's been a massive regulatory impost on banks. The volume of regulatory requirements that have been pushed onto banks in terms of what they need to do to meet regulatory obligations.
Oh yeah, and things like the money laundering and that has had massive impact.
Triple CFA.
Yeah, on business and that. And I'm constantly hearing stories of people trying to transact simple financial transactions and banks having to apologise how difficult it is for them to do that.
Yeah, and look, we really actually hope that the Commerce Commission look into the regulatory impost on banks, because, the impact that has in terms of what it prevents banks from being able to do to innovate and do new things for customers is really challenging. And so the regulatory framework is a big factor in the way banks are able to do the right thing for their customers.
Yeah. Would you think a change of government might end the inquiry or change its focus?
I don't think so. I think the National Party have said that they support in principle what the inquiry occurring. And however, they also, I think, are very keen that that the inquiry looks at some of these regulatory impacts. And I know that the opposition are very concerned, and they've talked quite openly about wanting to review the regulatory regime in New Zealand.
All right, so we might see a change to the inquiry if there were a change of government. It might morph into an inquiry into something else, or it could.
Well, who knows? They are unusually publishing what they call a preliminary issues paper, which will happen in August, which happens to be 2 months before the election. So it's understood that paper will give the direction of travel, if you like, in terms of what the report or what the investigation will focus on. And so that will largely be set in stone before the election. But I guess if there was a change in government, a new minister might.
So let me get this. So we're going to go. Look, bureaucracy. I never get it. How long it takes to do things. So it won't be until after the election that the inquiry proper starts, because at the moment we're paying a whole lot of shiny bums to write a paper about what the inquiry is about, and then we'll get some comment on that, and the actual inquiry won't start till after the election.
Oh no! In theory, the work is being done already commenced in terms of what those priority issues will be. That paper will be published in August, and then at that point, the full inquiry will commence, and that'll take 12 months. So it'll be August next year when this report is released in full.
Okay, I won't put any money on it with you. You're a banker. You'll probably take it off me. I say this thing never actually gets off the ground. That is pure politics. And the timing of it tells me that it'll get kiboshed somewhere or other, or it'll morph into an inquiry into regulation. Roger, I thank you very much for joining us and explaining that to us today. And I hope your members keep making money, because if they don't, we're all in trouble.
That's right. Thanks, Sean. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Roger Beaumont from the Bankers Association. Now, I'm going to make an observation here. There's an indication that change is coming at the election, because lobbyists like that, and I'm not talking particularly about Mr. Beaumont and particularly about banking, lobbyists are incredibly careful about offending people with power, even if they strongly disagree with them. They do try not to piss off the government, because the government can do all sorts of mean things to you. I thought that was quite a rebellious interview in the context of where lobbyists have been, and I'm increasingly hearing this from people around the traps in Wellington, that maybe you can poke the borax at the current government a bit because they may not be round forever. But, and I'll tell you what, playing class warfare using banks is a pretty old lefty trick, and pretty traditional and pretty boring, to be honest. But some of you... Oh, who is it? It's our mate Keller. Oh no, the poor banks, those poor hard done by banks, just imagine they might not be able to exploit us and make record profits anymore. Won't someone think of the banks? Sean, getting a banker to defend why banks, he's not a banker actually, he's a public relations consultant or exponent. Why banks should be allowed to make billions of dollars is like getting a thief to justify why they should be allowed to steal. How about you read Chloe Schwabrick's piece on the banks, or at least get her on the show to educate you on the banks? We'd love to, Keller, but she won't come on. Greens have banned us, Keller, so that's why we don't have Chloe's views on the banks. And she's also stoned a lot of the time, Keller. Keller, I'd also point out, where do you keep your money, mate? And your dad, the doctor, where did he keep his money? In a bank, Keller. Keller, would you rather have a world without banks where we all stuffed our money in our mattresses and went down round stealing it off each other, Keller? Oh, Keller, that's so classic. You are so classic. Sean, by the way, hang on, I will go back to the earlier text on that. If so, competition is so stiff, how come the profits are so high? Because you've got to have money to make money, that's why. By the way, I work for a big Aussie bank. They are not cost efficient, but they still make massive profits. Okay, is that a crime? I thought that was the whole idea of a market-led capitalist economy. Sean, the banking inquiry means nothing to poor people. They don't have mortgages. It costs $5 a month to have a bank account. The real problem for everyone is the price gouging from supermarkets. We all have to eat, and the supermarkets are holding us hostage. That is Alex. Well, they don't hold you hostage, the supermarket. They don't lock the doors and say you can't leave. They don't hold you at the checkout. Certainly, I would say in the practicality of people's lives, the supermarket duopoly is more of a concern in the everyday lives of New Zealanders than banks, where there are 15 different trading banks. Keller, you poor thing. I remember being 20 and angry at the world. Hope you get help, says Lucy. Sean, you're wrong. I was watching One News last night and Labor going to win the election with 99% of the vote. That hit piece on Luxon buried the National Party. They have no chance. Everyone knows that owning Tesla is a hate crime and is causing all the issues we are facing due to National's 9 years of red wine is the song. Sean, Keller is seeking lifestyle direction from Chloe Swarbrick. Laugh out loud, he's completely effed, says Dave.